From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Why does the United States pay higher drug prices than other countries? Because America's the only country in the world where 340B hospitals mark up drug prices and PBM middlemen charge billions in hidden fees. Meanwhile, Americans subsidize the research and development for new cures. Other countries benefit, but don't pay their fair share. Crack down on the middlemen. End the free riding. Lower drug prices. Go to balancethescales.org to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Next year, the United States turns 250 years old. And all across the country, cities and states are gearing up to mark the occasion. But here in Kentucky, figuring out what exactly we're celebrating can get a little murky. When we throw a birthday party for a place, what are we actually honoring? The date was founded, chartered, incorporated, and how do these dates shape how we understand where we live and who we are? Today, we're unpacking the origin stories of cities, states, and the nation itself, and why these timelines matter. And since Louisville is home to the Happy Birthday song, it feels like the perfect place to ask, when is a place really born? Joining us is Dr. Patrick Lewis, historian, author, and president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Kentucky, where he also taught and has worked with the National Park Service and the Kentucky Historical Society. Dr. Lewis, welcome to On Track.
So happy to be here.
So to start us off, what is the Filson Historical Society and what kind of work do you do?
So the Filson Historical Society is a private nonprofit research library and a programming center where Louisville has come to talk about local and regional and national history since 1884. So our headquarters is on 3rd Street in Old Louisville, where you can come in and do research in any of our historical collections if you're looking at local and family history or house history, or you've got a big research project that ties into the America 250 commemoration. You can come and see us and do that research. And then we also hold public lectures and conversations, usually about one a week at our space.
Wow, 1884. I
Yes.
mean, I should expect that it would be old. So the U.S. will mark its 250th anniversary next year, 2026. Where does Kentucky's story fit into that national timeline?
That's a really great question, and the answer is right in the middle of it. And I think this is really fascinating. We're sort of complicating this idea of birthdays and anniversaries here. And while the national commemoration is going to be around July 4th, 2026, marking the signing of the Declaration of Independence as the sort of the formal creation of what becomes the United States, Kentucky's story as part of the United States, not its birth story, right? Kentucky and Kentuckians have been here for thousands of years, but Kentucky's relationship with this emerging independent republic on the coast sort of predates and then crosses over and then moves through that time as well. So it's a really rich time for us to talk about local history, but also I feel like we can do a really important thing in this national conversation of saying, well, maybe this is just more than one day, guys.
Yeah. And so, well, I mean, that's where we get to measuring, right? So to understand how we measure the age of a place, let's lay out a little history. How and when did Kentucky become a Commonwealth?
Sure. Well, Kentucky becomes a Commonwealth in 1792, specifically on June 1st. So that was when we officially became a separate state, entering the United States from Virginia. Before that, we had been first originally one county and then a number of counties as the population increased of Virginia and had representation in the government there in Eastern Virginia, and through that in the United States government. But so 1792 is our official demarcation date. And to be quite honest with you, as the Filson has planned not only our America 250 commemorations that have already begun for us, but focused around 2026, we also ran a timeline out to 2042 because we've got to be marking all of those dates that lead up to statehood. And that 250th anniversary as well.
So you're on top of all, of course, I would not expect anything less that you would have these timelines ready.
And absolutely. And I was reading a book just this morning and thought, ooh, I've got another few dates to add to the 2030 calendar. I went and made a few updates when I got into the office.
That's really exciting. Well, okay, so you mentioned Commonwealth and state, and I find this confusing not being from Kentucky. Just for those who don't know, what is the difference between being a Commonwealth and being a state, if any?
Functionally, nothing.
Okay.
But we like our little points of pride and local flair, and that is one of them. We inherit this from Virginia, which is also a Commonwealth. Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. There are a handful in the Union right now, and this really fascinatingly sort of points back to this long history that leads us up to the American Revolution and through. And the idea of the Commonwealth is this British political concept that emerges out of this, sort of unique political culture, out of Magna Carta, out of the parliamentary system, out of the English Civil War, and the deposition of the royal house and Oliver Cromwell. It gets back into some real deep things that are distant history to us now, but actually are really, really present and alive in the minds of the American political founding generation. And so they really hearken into this idea of Commonwealth as a representation of exactly what it means, right? Of that the state should equally benefit all of its members. Now, we have to be very clear up front that the definition of who is a member and who is a citizen of the state that can benefit in that Commonwealth in the 17th and 18th and 19th and arguably into the 20th century is a very, very firmly drawn line that excludes a lot of people. But within that conception, they really did hold that up as a virtue.
So when we talk about, a place's birth or birthday, what is the difference now when we're getting to that origin between being founded, settled, established, chartered, or incorporated? And how do those milestones shape the stories we tell?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think particularly if we're looking at these markers of sort of legal incorporation, that is going to make the participants in that play a whole lot fewer and a whole lot less representative of the sort of the whole cast that was on the stage at the time. And so for us at the Filson, we've been trying to lay the groundwork for 2026 for a few years now. So we made a big push and led a bus tour for some of our members last year out to the states of Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, to really sort of explore the century of European and indigenous conflict, colonialism in the French-speaking world primarily, but also into the Spanish Empire eventually, that sort of predated the story that we are familiar in following of George Rogers Clark and this Virginia, migration over across the mountains. But really to say that, no, there's been a whole century of global interconnection here. And fascinatingly, if you looked at the world in 1740 or 1750, arguably the intersection of the Ohio and the Mississippi valleys, right? So if you put a crosshair right over the top of Kentucky, I don't know that there is a more sort of interesting and sort of globally inclusive place on the face of the planet, right? There aren't many people here. It's not a big metropolitan city of the Atlantic world, but man, there's just about every spectrum of belief and origin and language and political structure and there's some really fascinating histories here that if we only look at what's happening in July 4th, 1776 really gets obscured. If we only look at, George Rogers Clark establishing the city of Louisville in Corn Island before he launches off into this world that he quite honestly doesn't know much about, then we've missed a whole big picture of the story.
Yeah, and it seems like there's many parts of that, and I want to get into that, but I am going to get into some nitty gritties just to understand it, because I want to talk about Lexington and Louisville. I have read that Louisville is considered Kentucky's first city, but Lexington is often described as older, celebrating 250 years this year. How are those dates determined? How can a city be older than the Commonwealth it's in, or even older than the country itself?
That's a really great question. So there are a number of surveyors that come into Kentucky in 1773 and 1774. They're sent by the government of Virginia to lay out plots of land that the colonial government, and we are thinking about now here a British colonial government under the then Governor Lord Dunmore, they're looking for these plots of land to pay soldiers and officers who had fought for Virginia and therefore for the British Empire in what we call the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War. And so these teams of surveyors sort of crawl all over the state, and there are a number of different ones, and they have these sort of very loose interactions with one another. And they're looking, primarily moving up and down the river valleys, for really, really good land with good flat spaces for agriculture and springs and flowing water and ways to transport goods out and ways to get migrants in. And so a lot of these water courses and what will become the Central Bluegrass become really, really valuable places. And if you kind of lay over a map of all the surveys that these folks did in 1773, 74, it's a lot of the highest population centers in Kentucky today. Not surprisingly, it's good land. And so they go back, and then with that information, then settlers start to come in. We have Harrodsburg it claims to be the first and the oldest. They celebrated their 250th anniversary last year in 2024. Some open questions about how permanently that was established and settled. Lexington becomes really the epicenter of the bluegrass, sitting in the sort of the really heart of kind of 50 square miles of just unparalleled pasture land. It's the best pasture land in the world. That's why all the thoroughbreds go there. And then Louisville is particularly valuable because it has the Falls of the Ohio. And that presents a transportation headache because you cannot move goods downriver because there's a waterfall. There's now a dam and a fossil bed and an Indiana State Park there, but you can't move things downriver. And so you have to unload portage around the falls, which means carry your boat and your stuff over to Portland, put it back on a boat, and send it downriver. So that becomes a strategically valuable place as well. So, by the time we get to, maybe 1775, 1776, some of these settlers now equipped with these survey plots are coming in and establishing what they'll call stations, which are basically fortified cabins, clusters of cabins. Sometimes they're formal enough to have walls put around them, like we see it at Boonesboro, for example, and we start to see towns emerge from them. Sometimes those towns will persist, like in Lexington or like in what becomes Louisville around the Falls of the Ohio, and sometimes those will kind of fall away and disappear like Boonesboro did, right? Eventually folks move away from there, and there's not any sort of permanent town that builds up around that spot.
So, but then how do they decide? This is our beginning of our town. Is there a town charter that's we have a council now and this is when we've established Harrodsburg or?
Yeah, they are very concerned about establishing governments and legitimizing their presence here. And this is particularly also complicated at this moment of fighting a war against the colonial government that sent them out here in the first place. And so there's a lot of concern about whose land titles are valid. The governor sent us out here and he's siding with the empire. Are all of the land claims that have been surveyed here legitimate? Now, do we report to, once we get a Virginia government that participates in the Continental Congress and participates in what becomes the United States after 1776? That seems to be the more legitimate, and most people favor that. At the same time, there are Tory settlements here out in the backcountry, Bryan Station, right outside of Lexington. There's a high school named Bryan Station High School in Lexington. That's a Tory settlement. So those are folks who want to side with the empire and want to see this part of the world remain part of the British Empire, are here as well. We often forget that. And then there are also private land companies. So Richard Henderson, who is at Boonesboro and Daniel Boone is working for, on his own, negotiated a treaty with the Cherokee, paid them in cash for the grants of certain areas of land that fit uncomfortably overlapping on top of what the Virginia colonial government wanted to use in these surveys, right? So there's loyal governments, there's rebel governments, and there's private interest all trying to sell the same land here. And of course, the native people who have been here for thousands of years and do not want to give up their land.
Right. So I guess when it sounds like there's like, a lot of competing, like if there's competing ideas about this of a place's origin story, how do historians navigate that?
Yeah, no, it's really complex. Fortunately, because the centers of most legal authority at this time are over across the mountains in Virginia, people will have to write things down and carry surveys, documents, town meeting minutes, all of those sorts of things over across the mountains, where the state government in Virginia will record those and then send instructions back. So there's a good paper trail for us. And we think about folks like Daniel Boone being, these kind of backwoods explorers. I mean, they're surveyors, they're scientifically trained, they understand math, they can do complex geometry. And make maps and write very well. Daniel Boone has a copy of Gulliver's Travels with him in his backpack as he's coming and surveying Kentucky. And as far as I know, that's the first book in English that makes its way into what is going to become Kentucky, which is this whole other fascinating window onto the intellectual life of our state. But this is to say that these aren't ignorant backwoods people. They are highly literate and connected into this legal and economic world. So we're able to piece together a lot of these things, and it's really quite amazing how much you can overlay some of these 1770s, 1780s surveys onto contemporary land maps and find exactly where they're talking about. Mostly because Kentucky spends about 20 years tied up in legal battles about all these conflicting and overlapping survey claims and things like that. So I think there's this incredible paper trail, but also this need that all of these participants have in this settling process to legitimize their presence here by the creation of a town, a council, a militia to protect themselves and all of these kinds of things. And so this institutionalization becomes part of the settling process.
Well, we'll be back in just a minute. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and we're talking about how places get their age and why those origin stories matter with Dr. Patrick Lewis, President and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. Now, earlier you talked about this. I mean, the U.S. and Kentucky were founded on land long inhabited by indigenous people. How do you think that reality should factor into how we talk about when places began?
Yeah, no, that's a really fantastic question. Again, the archaeological record here, and then the record of the tribes whose ancestral land this is, the stories that they have preserved within their traditions are pretty clear and plain that there are thousands of years of habitation here. Now, very interestingly, because of the pressure that a lot of these tribal nations had been under in the century before, Daniel Boone and George Rogers Clark and Simon Kenton sort of emerge out of the Cumberland Gap, those Anglo-Virginia settlers encounter a world in the midst of chaos, right? If you imagine a global refugee crisis and the collapse of states due to military pressure from both those colonial governments, French, Spanish, English, but also from other indigenous nations further north and east and south who are putting pressure on these people. And so, Kentucky is when we say Kentucky now, we really should be talking about a much bigger vision of this whole region, not just the contemporary bounds of the state, but we're talking, up to Pittsburgh, into Ohio, southern Indiana, Tennessee as well. Basically, all of the Ohio Valley watershed that will drain in there is basically sort of in geopolitical play at this point. And so we have this really fascinating intersection point from various native linguistic and ethnic groups that represent sort of the whole continent converging here as well, right? The Cherokee have been a long presence in the South along the Tennessee and the Cumberland River valleys. The Shawnee have, sort of represented basically Ohio and come down into the bluegrass. There's Haudenosaunee or Iroquois pressure that's coming in from the Great Lakes area and especially hitting the Shawnee very hard and scattering them all across the eastern half of North America. And then as you move further and further west, you get groups like the Miamia, the Miami, the Illinois, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, the Quapaw, as you hop over the Missouri River.
In saying that, do you think there are better, more inclusive ways to mark anniversaries or milestones, ones that reflect the fuller story of a place and its people?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating as we've started to engage at the Filson more with the tribal nations whose ancestral lands are here. It really is sort of recognizing that their priorities are not in these chronological demarcations of settler time. That's not an important date for them. Instead, what they are more interested in, and I find really fascinating, are reclaiming traditional sort of indigenous concepts of time marking. And so revitalizing the use of lunar calendars and the sort of that ties in with the environmental cues that sort of triggered, sort of important events and dates and the planning and hunting and movement cycles of those communities. And so, I think this is an opportunity for us to maybe open a door and say, one, Native people are vital to this story of the settlement process here in whatever land we're talking about. And sort of that perspective needs to be represented and included. Also, that doesn't align neatly with our sense of time and date. So those communities still exist, are telling those stories, and are actively trying to reclaim. And I find that really fascinating as well, that this isn't just a sort of a fixed, point in time where they sign a treaty and then automatically disappear from that landscape.
Right.
There are stories of course, removal, but also of survival and remaining and hiding. And then now, fortunately, in this moment of reemergence and cultural flourishing.
So, the Filson, you said, is planning to commemorate some of many anniversaries, it sounds like, coming up. Whether that's maybe for city, state, country, like what do you have planned?
Yeah, so, I'm really excited. We were talking a little bit about Boonesboro earlier. Later this fall, we're going out to Lower Howard Creek Nature Preserve and doing a walk through that original roadbed of the Athens-Boonesboro Road, right? One of the first roads that's cut into the interior of Kentucky as soon as the Boone and company leave that fort. Absolutely incredible. So that's going to be a really important moment for us. We're going to have lots of lectures and opportunities. I think one of our big themes is not just focusing our commemorative activities in the 1770s, though that's actually really important and definitely something that we can complicate and provide a much denser narrative than perhaps we have in the past. But also reflecting for us on what are the themes that are embedded in that Declaration of Independence that are eternal. Right. Where have we challenged ourselves, and where have we still got work to do to live up to these promises about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everybody? And so we've been really focusing on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is a real big one for us. But also, at the same time, in 1776, E pluribus unum, from many one, appears on U.S. currency for the first time. And so we're really focusing on that, right? Like, whose stories can we really elevate here, who have lived these values? Maybe those folks, came here 20 years ago. Maybe they came here yesterday, but they're living the values that Jefferson recognizes that he's not fully living up to when he writes that Declaration of Independence. So we're really looking to sort of where can we see these stories of resilience and assertion of rights, participatory democracy, over time that we can really celebrate.
So why do you think it matters for us, the general public, to ask questions about how and when places began? What's at stake in getting that story right?
Yeah, no, that's really important. Well, I think it's a matter of place and belonging, right? There is and there always has been this sense in many places, and including in Kentucky and the United States more broadly, that where, if you haven't been here long enough, you don't have as much of a say as other people who have. And again, I think complicating these ideas of saying, well, when are we talking about and for whom, and why did we choose that date and not this other one, and whose stories does that exclude in the moment that we're talking about 200 or 250 years ago? It also allows us to sort of break that down now in the moment and say, well, maybe we should also be reflecting on who's being represented in our museums, who's being represented in our historical collections, our publications, through our media outlets, right? And really focusing on recognizing that there's work to do at both ends of the chronological spectrum.
I love that. Now, before I let you go, because you are a history buff, obviously, in your research or work at the Filson, have you come across any surprising or lesser-known stories about how Kentucky cities were first formed, or any first forming were established that are something you'd want to share?
Oh, man. I will say one of my favorite sort of avenues into this earliest moment of settlement in Kentucky is through the Christian family. They move here to Jefferson County in about 1786. William Christian has been a longstanding, Virginia military officer, serving in the 7 Years' War, Lord Dunmore's War, and some campaigns against the Cherokee in 1776. Eventually buys land and moves here to Jefferson County. Brings along with him his wife, Annie Henry Christian, who's Patrick Henry's sister. So a very well-connected Virginia family. And they established the farm that is now Oxmoor, which we all know from the mall. And they are not here for about 6 months before William is killed by Native Americans as part of his military service in the Jefferson County Militia. And so this leaves Annie Henry Christian to sort of run the business of operating Bullitt's Lick, which is one of the major salt-making operations in what's now Bullitt County along the Salt River, that is really keeping this settlement on the falls of the Ohio viable, because salt is so vital for the preservation of meat that without it, this settlement along the Beargrass Creek and along the falls of the Ohio is probably going to fall apart. So they run that as their own private business, and at the archives in the Filson, you have to come to Oxmoor and pay Annie Christian for your salt before you go down there and get it. And so everybody who's anybody has to come and conduct this business. And she, interestingly, only works with the wife of her nominal supervisor down there at Bullitt's Lick, who actually runs the business. So it's two women holding up all of commerce in Jefferson and Bullitt counties on the frontier. And I think that is one of the most fascinating stories that you can really start to dig on.
Dr. Lewis, that's so fascinating. Thank you so much for being here on track and sharing all this with us.
So thrilled to be here.
Dr. Patrick Lewis is a historian, author, and president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Kentucky, where he also taught and has worked with the National Park Service and the Kentucky Historical Society. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about? Something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or calling us at 502-814-TALK or an email at ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, where it began helps shape where we stand. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.